everybody. I hope your week is off to a good start. Um, I'm not going to be on here long, but I did want to make a video about something I have made a video about earlier, um, months back, right when I was starting my channel, um, on the trial of Chrystul Kizer. Chrystul Kizer was, at the time that she came into the news and consciousness publicly, was 17, and she is a victim of sex trafficking specifically. And she was found guilty today for killing a man that sexually trafficked her and that she also said raped her and essentially pimped her out regularly. And she was convicted of murder today, given 11 years in prison for it. And she won't have to serve like a year and some change because she's already been in prison. This man, Richard Volar III, okay? I'm sorry, not Richard. Randall P. Volar III, okay? When she killed him, she was 17. He was 34 years old. This is a white man in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Okay? The police already had tapes of this man engaged in sexual acts with young black girls specifically, who were poor. And even the police had noted in the records that many of these girls looked as young as 12, but all of them were either early to mid-teens. This was already on record. This son of a bitch still got to walk free. Okay? Now they noted this. They have video evidence and everything. Chrystul Kizer ends up killing this man. Now, how does she get caught up in this? Well, Kenosha, Wisconsin is akin to what Ferguson is to St. Louis. All right. Kenosha's right outside of Milwaukee. Okay. And she killed this man after he, one, had raped, assaulted, and sex trafficked her on multiple occasions without consequence. Now, where have we seen this before? Centoya Brown. If you don't know who this is, look it up. I'm not here to shame anybody for not knowing, but I need to make this point because we talk about sex trafficking, and it's often, in many ways, typically depicted to the public as something that happens to young immigrant women, mostly young immigrant European women, occasionally, the white appearing Latinas. But this happens to young black girls often and disproportionately. And she was still allowed to give an affirmative defense, or her lawyer was. An affirmative defense is something that more than 30 states have. And this is essentially provisions that allow trafficking victims to be acquitted of certain charges against them if they can prove at trial that the crime was committed because of their abuse. So in other words, self-fucking defense. Okay? Now, she's 17. The first offense here is that she was 17 in a house with a 34-year-old man who was not her father, uncle, relative, anything of the like. The fact that he was a perpetual abuser of young black girls and there had never been an indictment despite video evidence being in the hands of the police is disgusting. And we've seen this movie before. All those women that kept showing up, we heard the same pattern, but not the same stories from the same people over and over and over again with R. Kelly. He had been doing that. We don't know all the girls he sexually assaulted and molested and raped. But we do know that. And it's because people oftentimes will pick their victims in a way because they know there's a lack of consequences for it. And once again, it has been proven that no matter what happens, that a black person can always be found guilty. And when a black person is going through this sort of process, they typically have to be a perfect victim. They need to be a straight A student. They need to never have had any run-ins at school with a teacher or a principal or another kid. All the shit that came out with Trayvon Martin when he had been suspended. Mike Brown, when he went in the store and stole. Mike Brown never stole shit. These are the stories that they create. But with black girls, even in the African American community, this is not to suggest in any shape or to pathologize. It is not to suggest in any shape, way, or form that black men are not disproportionately abused, murdered, okay, and oppressed by the police systems. But black women are too, and it's still not something that's really being included within our lexicon and in our popular understanding of police abuse, okay? And neither is this trafficking thing, and that's where we have to change this narrative. All right? Now, she was somebody that met this man on something known as Backpage.com. Okay? It was a major online marketplace for prostitution before it was, found out to be a place involving sex trafficking. Where there's smoke, there's fire, okay? But to me, it's not prostitution. I think it's inappropriate to call it child prostitution when somebody's a goddamn child, because it implies a level of still, despite the desperation, of choice. You don't have a choice at that age. Do you know why she was on there deciding she would sell her body? And this is according to the Washington Post. The Washington Post has actually, the articles that I have read, over the course of this, case over the years, has actually done a good job bringing in the details of the trauma and the background in a way most people who cover it don't. But Kizer, when in court, when they asked why she would even do this, you know how they like to blame the victim. Older girls who she befriended, and I'm reading it straight out the Post, told her it was a way she could make the money she needed for snacks, school supplies, and food for her younger siblings. How sad is that? How sad is that? That the level of desperation, one, the consideration that this was a way to take care of her other siblings and herself, and the ability to go to school and have things, basic things. And this is the way she sought to do it. And before anybody starts, well, where are the parents? Where are the parents? Where are the parents? Yes, people need to raise their kids. The mother is a single mother and was working all the time and still, okay, was working and needed her help, because Kizer's the oldest kid, to take care of the younger siblings. And the thing is, when I say parents need to raise their kids, sure. Where the fuck was her father? Women don't just get babies out of nowhere. That's not how that works. And the real question, even before we get into that, because I'm not suggesting that children who get in these situations, well, there has to be a level of neglect, but poverty is not neglect, right? Maybe neglect of the larger capitalist system, but it's not neglect. It's your fucking circumstances. But the real question at the root of this is this fucking 34-year-old grown-ass motherfucking man that did this to this young girl when he first met her at 16. Hell, she looks 16 now, and now she's 24, which is another game they play in court, particularly with trafficking victims and particularly with young black trafficking victims. It's the same game they did with the big R. Kelly case in the early 2000s, where he got off. What they did was they kept stretching out the time. So by the time she really got to court for the big case, what happens is she looks older. They're referring to her already as a woman, even though she's still young, 24 now. They're referring to her as a woman because that implies some level of adult decision making. And the younger she looks, the more likely people are to have sympathy. But not when you black. Now, why is this a big deal? It's a big motherfucking deal because it's the same goddamn city where Kyle Rittenhouse, when he was 17 years old, the same age where she gets caught murdering him and admits it but says it's because of self-defense, when he shot 3 fucking people who were protesting, and they were white. He shot 3 white people who were protesting police brutality for the police shooting of Jacob Blake, all right, which paralyzed him, by the way. They were protesting that. He shoots 3 people, gets off, and they claim that he had the right because that was self-defense. This girl's been raped multiple times. This man who raped her is on camera. This is in possession of the police. In 2019, the Washington Post did an investigation, okay? Showed that Kenosha police, and I'm just going to read it straight off, that the Kenosha Police Department knew Voller was abusing underage black girls for nearly 3 months before his death, after a 15-year-old black girl fled from his home in nothing but a bra and jacket. Police raided Voller's residence and found hundreds of videos of child sexual abuse. Among the stash were videos of Voller had made of Kizer and girls who appeared to be as young as 12. But while the investigation continued, police and prosecutors allowed Voller to remain free. Now you tell me where the first crime was fucking committed. And the judge in his sentencing, his response, Judge Wilk of Kenosha, Wisconsin, says Kizer's childhood explains her circumstances, but it doesn't excuse them. Well, I be motherfucked. Kyle Rittenhouse is getting invited by Trump to Mar-a-Lago after shooting people who are protesting police brutality, which we all know is the brutality that happens against black people. I'm not really into this black and brown bullshit as it references to Latinos. They have their struggle and they can speak for themselves, because what it does is it's a way of diminishing that the whole root of white supremacy needs the existence of blackness that has come about as a result of the history of enslavement of African descended people. I'm not trying to sit up here and have diaspora wars and shit. I'm not trying to do that, but I'm making a fucking point. This is the kind of shit they say and do to us. And it's not just, oh, this is just her problem, or this is just a household problem. It's all of our fucking problems. If it happens to one, it happens to all. And this is one of these books that really changed the way, and I know I brought it up before, really changed the way I thought about the criminalization of black girls in schools, because many black girls are trafficked disproportionately. And in the process with their pimps, they are unable to go to school, which therefore decreases the amount of African American girls getting educated and therefore their opportunities, but thus making them available to the prison system for cheap labor. Not to mention all the rapes that happen in prison against their will. And this is something that has a long history. This didn't just come out of nowhere. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but if you're not, there was a woman named Ruby McCollum in Florida in 1952. And she shot a man who was also her doctor in Live Oak, Florida. Dr. C. Leroy Adams. And Dr. C. Leroy Adams was a white man, by the way, who was a prominent white doctor and had just been elected state senator. He was also her gynecologist. He had been sexually abusing her. Additionally, her husband, her black male husband, was also physically abusive to her. Who was she going to tell? Now, people in the community knew because he would go and show up at their house because he was, her husband, they were like a middle-class couple, and he, I think, sold insurance or something to that degree. They did not allow the child that she produced from rape for their face to be brought into the courtroom. The judge had to throw it away. Or no, not the judge. The judge said, no, it can't be there. They literally interviewed people who were around in the courthouse, not necessarily on the jury. There was a couple that were on the jury, but who said there was no way. And these are like older white people and black people too. They were like, honestly, there was no way anybody could have looked at that kid and said, this was not his. And we all know how that goes down south. That woman was obviously convicted. We already know how that goes with an all-white jury. And she was also kept from recounting those details during trial. She is sentenced to prison and the death penalty. She eventually does not get the death penalty. She is actually able to eventually get an insanity plea. Then they send her into a mental hospital in the state of Florida where she's supposed to get care. But like everything else, it was essentially segregated even in the 70s. So she wasn't getting the proper care, so on and so forth. She eventually dies in 1992, but not before she gets out. The level of trauma that black women endured. She was not the only black woman that he sexually abused that way. But him taking quote unquote black clients and shit like that. She was a married woman with children of her own. That's the kind of shit I'm talking about. The reason why we are so prone to thinking, oh, young black girls are fast, and this is why they need to do this, and why they shouldn't be dressed in this way. Now, I'm not saying, because I want to keep this within reason, and I don't want this video to go off the rails. Yes, there are appropriate ways to dress for a job. No, you should not be wearing shorts to a fucking interview, girl on TikTok. Use a dumbass. All right? You're supposed to be wearing slacks. Now, we can't presume that people know better, but here we go. You Google every goddamn thing else. All right? But this is what I mean. White girls I saw in school that would not get pulled aside with the fingertip rule the same way black girls did because their thighs were thicker, because what looked like was supposed to be their fingertips. Our bodies are different. And all of our bodies were policed as young black girls, particularly in the South. I don't know how it was up here in the North, but those kind of fingertip rules, your shorts couldn't come up any shorter, and it's hot as hell down there. The boys had no restrictions on their outfits, and I went to public school. We didn't have uniforms or anything. But, oh, she's just fast. She just acts like this. The way we've even conditioned our own brain comes from the history of rape and sexual assault against African-American females. I'm going to say females in this case because at the end of the day, girls were being raped, not just women, not just, all of that stuff. Sally Hemings is an example of that. Stop trying to act like her and Thomas Jefferson had a relationship. She was a 13-year-old fucking child who he impregnated over and over again and paraded her across France as she was a goddamn child. And the justification, even in the notes on slavery that Thomas Jefferson wrote himself, unashamedly, is this idea that many slave masters wrote about. Oh, well, the Africans, they are like animals. They're like beasts. It's not rape. They like it when you treat them like that, so on and so forth. And then the narrative, of course, becomes one, like typically oppressed people do and abused people do. They tend to turn in on themselves and one another. So black men feeling powerless, blame black women because they feel less than a man, can't protect her, so on and so forth, or don't, but really can't, certainly in slavery. And so then it still becomes a narrative, well, I can't help it. Well, I'll be lynched if I do anything. Many black men were lynched trying to protect their families. But is the issue always that black men should, yes, they should protect. Yes, of course, in theory. But that's not the first issue if they don't protect young black girls. The first issue is why the fuck are pedophiles doing what the fuck they do? And white ones always get off scot-free in court. And rich ones too. There's a reason why these crimes haven't been really codified in law. Because once it's codified, then you have to really answer for it. And I'm getting upset. I'm angry. And I do want to make this as a side note. Monique Morrison, who wrote the book Push Out, who I believe now goes by Monique Coveson since ending her marriage or whatever. The woman who wrote this did write, this was back when Joe Biden was running for president, and he had just chosen Kamala Harris as his vice president. And I wasn't here for Kamala either. But one thing she did say, she said, I'm not a single issue voter. And I'm paraphrasing. I'm not a single issue voter. But when I was first trying to have these conversations about how black girls have got to be protected, because what she called it was the school to confinement pipeline for black girls, because they typically get brought into sex trafficking and therefore confined, unable to leave, and therefore unable to get their education. School to prison, but she said that's more appropriate for black males. She said that she was having one of those meetings. Some people came because they were interested and some did. And, it's one of those things that there's not a lot of knowledge around or that people are necessarily interested in. And she said this was even before she became a senator. Kamala Harris came and wanted to know what she could do. because she's out of the Bay Area too. And she said, while I'm not a single issue voter, there were people I couldn't get an audience with at all. Um, and she still came to this meeting that was relatively obscure, talking about black girls and sex trafficking. It wasn't, even as notable in terms of a conversation now. Then when she came in, and she was like, and I think that's worth mentioning, because that indicated to me she had a desire to see the safety of black girls. And of course, in those smaller groups, you're able to discuss those things. And I think that's worth noting. And this is not endorse Kamala Harris for this, but these are things I think we all need to be aware of. And I'm getting really angry. This is very hard for me to do this video. But we've got to keep fighting for Chrystul Kizer. Find out the petitions, the things we can do to support her attorneys as they try to defend her and appeal, hopefully. So yeah, and I'll leave the link of the Washington Post article if you're interested at the bottom. I hope you guys have a great day. I'll be watching the DNC and stuff this week. And I'll talk to y'all soon.